Welcome to Stubby Talks Transformation, the podcast where we explore what change really looks like inside of organizations, talking with the business leaders who really make change happen. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Hungerman, who is the founder and CEO of CI. Now, that's spelt slightly different to how I normally say it. So CI is normally kind of C and I, but CI is SEE/EYE, if that's my spelling's correct, Joe.
Yeah,
Um,
clever, right?
It's very clever. I love that. I love that. It's a pleasure to have you on today, sir. For those who don't know what CI is, your term of CI, can you give us a quick overview of the business and what you do?
That's taken so many different twists and turns over the years, but it's CI is a software platform. It originally started out as just kind of tackling continuous improvement stuff. So the whole intent was I've kind of always been like a jack of all trades. And something that really annoyed me about continuous improvement in manufacturing and healthcare was you had all these different places that had their very specific brand of improvement and everything was targeted towards that. So I wanted to have something that was more broad. So, we'll talk about improvement theater, I'm sure, but, you know, people get very dogmatic about the types and methodologies that they use to improve. And in my mind, it's all about improvement. That's my personality. I just like to improve things. I like to figure out better ways of doing things, and whatever tool in my toolbox I need to use, I want to use it. So if lean or Toyota production system fits, then we'll do some stuff with that. If theory of constraints or Six Sigma, even though Six Sigma for whatever reason has such a bad reputation these days, you know, everything has its place. And I have several advisors on my board that, have that same thought process. So CI, I really wanted to be a broad spectrum and give people the tools that they need to solve the problem at hand, regardless of what that problem is, and give them all the tools they need to do it. Now, there's a big, long roadmap of what we have planned. And I mentioned twists and turns and pivots. As a startup, you have to expect that whatever you go in with is not going to be what the final product is. So, after having hundreds of conversations with practitioners and leaders, and, if you and I have had several conversations about your experience,
Yep.
I really landed on the fact that the biggest challenge of sustainable improvement is getting leadership buy-in and therefore fostering those relationships. So I added a really great guy to my advisory board, David Bobus, who is also out in the UK. I'm a Yank that plays over in across the pond a lot. So he and his co-founder Levent Turk created this methodology called BTFA, Believe, Think, Feel, Act. And they're really trying to dig into the relationship side of continuous improvement and what that means. And I was lucky enough to go through their cohort, and it was really eye opening because if you stay on LinkedIn for any longer than like 5 minutes, you notice that it's just a big platform to complain about leadership. It's like every second or third post is, complaining about leadership or people talking about how to get leaders to bend to your will. And it really shouldn't be that way. We should all be working as a team. So where CI has gone is we're kind of taking more of a change management approach, and we're really trying to figure out, can we tackle the problem of relationships with software? And, this is something that we've struggled with in business for, a couple centuries since the Industrial Revolution. And we had to go through the bumps and bruises of scientific management and how, we treat people as resources rather than, as all people with a common goal. And when you treat people as resources, what you find is they don't get bought in, they don't get involved, and they really have no, stake in the game. They just, and you can't sustain improvement that way. You have to have
No.
people that are passionate about the things that they're doing. And the other side of that coin is leaders that talk a good game, but at the end of the day, it's just talk,
Yeah.
and it's still command and control and do as I say, or else sort of thing. And we want to figure out a better way to do that. So, we're really targeting kind of small to medium businesses right now because I
Yeah.
think gives us a shorter line to the leadership to really kind of instill these ideas and see where they're at because this platform is not going to be for everybody.
Yeah.
If somebody
Yeah.
just wants the command and control, then, I don't see them getting much benefit out of this. But if they want to create a team that works together, that flows, that iterates, that improves and sustains that improvement, well, then yeah, we're probably the right thing for you.
Brilliant. I think there for me, the thing I take from that is what you're trying to create with CI is making positive change happen across the board, isn't it?
For sure.
You've mentioned there Six Sigma, Lean, Toyota Production System. These are terms that some people are probably very familiar with, others maybe not. Where did your journey in this world start?
At the very beginning, it started when I was getting my bachelor's degree at Western Michigan University in integrated supply matrix management. At the time, it was a really groundbreaking type of program where it combined the business side of supply chain and the engineering side. So, half my courses were in business and supply chain, the other half were in engineering, like materials engineering and industrial engineering and things like that. So, one of the courses I had to take was on improvement. And we had to learn theory of constraints and lean concepts. Everybody uses the terminology lean, but really it was all derived from Toyota. And lean is just kind of a brand name that I think LEI came up with, Lean Enterprise Institute. Um, it, Krafsick, John Krafsick, he was a MIT guy. I think he was the first one that used the term lean. Um, I got my first taste of this stuff back then. And, I went into the purchasing side of supply chain, which didn't lend itself really to a lot of the types of improvements. So I didn't have a lot of initial applications. But as I progressed in my career, I got up to the point I was a purchasing supervisor and I was in a manufacturing facility that was just all over the place. I mean, it was the schedulers were handwriting schedules every 15 minutes because we couldn't keep up and it was just crazy. And, that had a lot of effect on purchasing. And I was also leading the material handlers. So,
Yeah.
you know, it was something where the material handlers were coming up to me daily, just complaining about how they got to move all the stuff around. And, they never have a schedule. They never know what they're supposed to move where. And I'm like, well, from this perspective, what if we started trying to apply some of these improvement things? So I had a small team. It was me and two other people, and we started reading books together. We started listening to books, audio books. We started, having a book club and bringing other areas of the plant. And once they saw what we were doing, they got super interested. So we had the engineering manager that joined us, and assembly manager, and a bunch of other people. And we really kind of did a grassroots improvement thing and, trying to instill all these concepts. And eventually, if, I don't know how much of your, I'm guessing a lot of your listeners are kind of logistics, supply chain, manufacturing type folks, but, you know, a, a natural progression of improvement is finding and coming across Scrum and Agile concepts in
Yeah.
software. And that too, like Six Sigma, has like a bunch of dirty word connotations about it these days. But, it was super interesting. And at the time, I was just about to get married, and my wife was getting her degree in software engineering. Um, so it just really caught my attention. So that just took me on a whole different direction. I ended up leaving manufacturing, going to healthcare for a bit. Still working a little bit in supply chain, but mainly in data. Then I went and worked directly in software and led software teams, and I had a passion for that. Left my job working for a software startup accelerator and said, you know what, I want to try my own thing, and just reflected on my career and looked at all the problems I had learning and finding all this stuff on continuous improvement and said, hey, let me solve my own problem. So
Yeah.
maybe
No.
other people share that problem.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that for me, what you've just said there is, I think a lot of people associate the tools and techniques to manufacturing, to logistics, to supply chain, but they can be used in any walk of life. You can continually improve anything. And I think those principles, the tools, the techniques can be widely adopted. And for me, I find that kind of education, that breakdown to say to people, you can do this. Just because you design stuff doesn't mean that you can't apply the principles. So yeah, that's really interesting. You mentioned improvement theatre, and kind of the difference between real change. What, in your view, Joe, are kind of the behaviors or patterns that sort of teams seem to be stuck in, kind of the superficial activity rather than meaningful improvement?
You can find this out pretty quickly. Like if you walk into wherever teams are working and there are just millions of KPIs wallpapered everywhere. Well, that's improvement theater. It's, going through the motions. Leaders go to the board and say, hey, we're doing this stuff. Pat us on the back. We're doing great. We're cutting all this cost. But, it's essentially just, working towards all these metrics, and all these metrics end up stumbling over each other, and you really don't progress. Yes, you have some superficial numbers and, but nobody pays attention to how it affects the system as a whole. So, you have all the soft cost savings and hard cost savings. So, um, it's all over the place. And then once this program once you get all the low hanging fruit, then all of a sudden, that's when you really have to dig in and do the work. But that's when a lot of teams kind of just give up on it because some other priority has come along and now it's something new. And I'm sure tons of people are just used to that. Strategy shifts year to year. And these days, you never know. When I worked in healthcare, the healthcare leadership turns over like every 3 years, and everybody wants to bring in their own thing, you know, and that's it switches constantly. But the
Yeah.
improvement theater aspect is, people getting in front of a crowd saying, hey, this is what we're doing, pat us on the back, but never really paying attention to whether that improvement is sustainable or whether it actually messed something up down the line. I mean, in systems thinking, you have these concepts of balancing loops and reinforcing loops, and every system, you know, deals with these kind of laws. And every time it's Newton's law, every action has a equal and opposite reaction. Well, a system operates that way too. So if the purchasing department cuts out, $2 million of cost out of the product, that's going to have an effect somewhere down the line because the
Mm.
supplier wasn't charging you $2 million extra of margin. They're going to find their own ways to cut corners. And if you're not working the entire supply chain from a continuous improvement mindset, then you're essentially just going through the motions and just, acting. You're not really doing.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, it's kind of doing things in isolation as well. You've got
Yeah.
teams that kind of so focused on themselves that they go, oh, if we change this and do this, that'd be great, but not
Yeah.
knowing the knock-on effect or impact, like you say. And I think that when you've got the whole value stream or the end-to-end process, whatever you want to call it, you've got a joined up view and thinking. Automation springs to mind for me. You get teams that go, we need to automate this part of the process, but there could be 4, 5, 6, maybe more different interactions or points that could be automated throughout the entire life cycle, that journey, where you've got real impact that can be made. And a lot of people sort of go, oh, we'll automate that 6 months later down the line, or we should have automated that as well. We'll do that now. And it becomes more of a cost, more of a hindrance than help, because you're just constantly retrofitting stuff that should have been done from day one, right?
automation is a crutch, and people see shiny new automation and new technology. And this is coming from a guy that's building a software platform. They jump at, they can't wait. And you see this with AI these days, but people don't understand how to apply it. It was the same thing back when ERP and MRP systems first, gained a lot of traction back in the early 80s. Um, people just threw these systems in place and expected them to solve all the problems. But, as Eli Goldratt kind of talked about in some of his lectures, they didn't change the paradigm. They just still did the same exact process, just with technology instead of completely overhauling everything and figuring out what's the best way to do things using technology, not what's the best way technology can replace things. And that's kind of where CI is headed. We want to be an amplifier of human relationships and an amplifier of human productivity, not a replacement for it.
Mm.
Kind of counterintuitive because we need to make money. So we need
Yeah,
people to buy the software, but at the same time, my own personal values are, human first. So we want to help people be more productive, enjoy work more, not just set up all this automation and use the software just to use it.
totally. And I think for me, my view on kind of any kind of change or improvement, continuous improvement, Six Sigma, whatever it might be, if the goal is to remove heads from an organization, straight away I'm misaligned with that ambition, because for me it's how can you make things more effective and more productive, keeping as many people as you possibly can, so that when automation comes in, you can reskill, retrain these people in these new technologies and these new systems that can really add value to the organization. I think I see so many times organizations are quick to hit the button and go, right, let's get rid of 20% of the headcount, but then they see growth a year or two later down the line and go, oh, we need these people back. But they've already moved on with their careers and it's too late at that point. You've then got to get new experience, new skills in, onboarding, training, all of these things that come into the mix that people don't calculate at the beginning and the impact that may have. Um, Interesting you say about the kind of the human first thing. I'm massive on kind of emotional intelligence and how humans behave in changes. A lot of organizations create logical plans, say, right, this is what's going to change first, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do that, but are then surprised when that change doesn't stick. Um, what's kind of the view in your eyes, how important the human side is versus the technical side, and how leaders can act better on that front?
If the humans don't understand what they're doing and what the technology is doing, then you're really setting yourself up for failure later. You People have to fully understand, and I've gotten an even bigger concept of this after, my foray into chess and studying chess. And there it's, you can memorize things, but at the end of the day, you have to understand the concepts.
Yeah.
If you don't understand the concepts, then you're just moving things around. And when people turn over and people leave, people come in, it's going to be that much harder to onboard them. And if you don't have people that are able to explain these things and explain the way the technology works and why do we do it this way and the how, then you're really going to put yourself in a situation where the technology rules all and nobody knows what's going on. And I saw this over and over again with ERP systems. It's
Mm.
nobody knows how to use them, nobody knows what's going on with them, and it's a big mystery. And then you have to bring in $1 million consultants to come in and train everybody, and it's just a night. I mean, that was something else that CI was originally intended to do was reduce the reliance on consulting. You
Yeah.
know, no offense, but
None taken. But it's interesting what you say there. I was talking to the managing director of a firm last year, who told me about a great CRM that he'd bought everything was bespoke, and he put a lot of time and effort into it. Actually got his people on the front line that would be using it to get some input of what would be good to include on it, which was fantastic. The guys that were building it then said, right, okay, that's ready to go. His team said, well, how do we use it? There was no training provided. So they reverted back to spreadsheets and back to how they were working before, because this new fancy system, they didn't understand it. And it's exactly what you said there. And I think so many times I see organizations that go, we're going to bring in this new fancy system. It could be something that's readily available off the shelf. It could be bespoke. It could be from a market leader. It's the senior people that are in these conversations getting demos and going, okay, that looks good. That fits our budget and we can do this. Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. But the guys on the ground generally are left in the dark as to what's happening. And I find that so frustrating, because when it comes to implementation, people go, well, hang on, we've got a system here that works. I mean, now we've got to find ways around because this doesn't work and that doesn't connect to that. And it's so frustrating, isn't it?
Yes. It's like somebody going out and paying 3,000 quid. I hope I'm using that word correctly.
That's correct. Yeah.
For a tuxedo and not getting a shave and a haircut. I mean, you're dressing up, but not really doing the extra work that's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. You mentioned systems thinking there as well. Can you walk us through how you see organizations as systems where structure, people, data, everything interacts, and what leaders often overlook when it comes to systems thinking?
That's such a loaded question. So, systems thinking, pretty much everything in the universe is a system. Doesn't matter how complex or simple, I mean, you get down to the root of it, there's things that are just not systems, but 99% of the world is. And I've had this debate with somebody about whether an organization is truly a system or not. And in my mind, it is, because something happening in one area of a system affects another area of the system, whether you know about it or not. And that is very true about manufacturing facilities and other organizations. Is, we have all these silos. We have the finance department, we have manufacturing, we have purchasing, we have all these different places that have their own goals, and they do their own things without working together cross functionally. And when you do that, like I mentioned before about the purchasing and buying from, a supplier saves costs. The impact of one area of a system is going to have an impact on another area of the system. You just don't understand it. And I think a big problem is rooted in General Motors. Um, they started this activity-based costing thing back in the early 1900s. And that has kind of ruined everything, because you have all of these, like in a manufacturing facility, you have all of these cells and they have pieces of equipment. And these pieces of equipment, somebody, reduces the cost of running that by 10%. Okay. And they get pat on the back and they get a promotion. But that change increased the amount of time that it takes to assemble the product by 30%. So you have this balancing loop. This change at one machine center doubled the impact that you saved there, doubled the cost at assembly. So you're really worse. So the assembly manager gets fired, and the manufacturing engineer that came up with this cost savings at a machining center gets promoted. And it's been this way for centuries. I mean,
Yep.
you just have to understand that, you have these balancing and reinforcing loops, and just try to simplify it as much as possible. Balancing loops, something happens, an opposite reaction happens at the other end of the system. Reinforcing loops, I think the gold standard of examples for a reinforcing loop is the Cold War. So the US builds up extra nuclear weapons. So Russia says, well, we can't have that. So they add more. And then the US says, well, now Russia has more than we do. So we got to add more. And it's just, that's a reinforcing loop where an action actually causes an even stronger digging in on another side. So instead of kind of balancing, it's kind of a race to the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the more I'm kind of talking to you, I learn so much when I'm talking to you, especially around systems. I think for me, when I see organizations that are working in silos and departments, and they're not joined up in their thinking or they're aligned, it really bugs me because, like you say, that knock-on effect is so powerful sometimes, and sometimes it can be really positive, that it can have a positive impact through the line. But what I hate to see is where sometimes a small change at the front of the process can have a knock-on effect and compound all the way through. So when the customer actually receives the product or service, they're like, what the hell is this? This isn't what I ordered. This is not what I paid for. And it's because you've almost gone through these different departments that have added their inefficiencies on top of one another, and it's just compounded. So I think you've got it sort of multiple ways, and you're right, that system, I think for me, organizational design is a massive thing as well. It's kind of, is the organization set up for success, or are we following your traditional kind of hierarchy because that's the way we've always done it and that's the way we should always do it?
If you don't have a good base, you're just reinforcing bad habits. You know, you have to have the structures and the processes in place first before you can improve anything. You have to know, I think Deming is 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 cited with this, but you know, he said if you don't know what you're doing, if you can't explain what you're doing as a system, you don't know what you're doing,
Yep.
or as a
Yeah.
set of processes, or something of that nature. I'm messing up that paraphrase completely, but
That's all right. That's all right. Just on that note, what time is it for you? Just in the UK, it's just gone 11 a.m. What time is it for you?
it is 5 a.m.
Okay. Whereabouts are you in the world? You said you're in America.
Nashville, Tennessee,
Okay.
Music
So
City.
is it because you're so eager to talk to me at 5 a.m.? Or is it, this is how you work?
This is really how I work. So people think I'm crazy. My therapist thinks I'm crazy. Uh, that's probably a bad thing. But, you know, I get up at somewhere around 12:30 a.m. and I start working. Um, it sounds problematic and it sounds like I'm a workaholic, but it's really not that way. I mean, I have a 5-year-old, so I'm kind of more on his schedule. And I just always got used to being able to do so much more early in the morning. And it just got earlier and earlier as I got older, especially after we had our son, that, you know, I needed time to be able to get stuff done with both of us working from home. We help each other out, you know, make sure he's taken care of. So getting stuff done early, plus in software, I have people I work with all over the world. So it got easier for me when, especially my last full-time job, I was working with a team in Sri Lanka. And, you know, I wanted to be on their hours so that, you know, an inconvenience on me is one person, an inconvenience on 20 people on a software team, which they would do anyway. But you know, that human aspect, that values part of me wanted to be on their schedule, not force them to be on mine. So it kind of started out that way, and I really enjoy it. I mean, I rotate back and forth. I work for a while, then I go study chess for a while, then I work for a while, then I study chess, then the day starts. So yeah, it's people don't understand it. I never worked third shift or anything like that, so it never started out that way. That's not why I'm up at these hours. It's just that's what I do.
Yeah. And since that full-time role, do you find your day has started earlier? Because you were getting up, was it 3 a.m. You'd start, or was it 2:30? Okay.
It has gradually gotten earlier, but it's just because my brain is always going 100 miles an hour. So if I wake up briefly in the middle of the night, my brain just goes crazy. And then I'm like, okay, I got to get up and tackle what I'm thinking about right now. I mean, it's just the way I am.
Fair play. Fair
Yeah.
play. Um, Now, just on that kind of personal aspect as well, last year was a really tough year for you. I think a lot of leaders find significant life events and changes really has a knock-on effect in how they work and lead people. Without going into too much detail, how has the experience of loss for you last year affected you, and how has that transformed how you are as a person today?
Well, I've got a lot more ink all over the place because of it, but um, yeah, 2025 is a year that I would like to completely erase from my memory. I lost my dog, which was my best friend. I lost my father-in-law, and I lost my mentor, Bob Rush, who was the sensei of CI. He was our heart and soul. Um, it took a lot out of me. I mean, it was something where I didn't I threw myself into work, which was having studied a ton of psychology, I knew was the wrong thing to do. And I had already started, going to a therapist to get my head checked regularly. Just, you know, I think it's important. Mental health is important. I don't know when mental health day is, but we all got to be more cognizant of what people are struggling with.
Mm.
Um, so losing all of them within 6 months, I mean, I just didn't know what to do. It was, and then we came up on the holidays, and my father-in-law was always Santa for all the kids in his city because he had a big beard and white hair, and I loved him to death. I mean, and I miss him greatly, and it was just really a struggle. So my therapist suggested that I stop working so much and find a hobby. So, like a ton of people, during COVID and after the Queen's Gambit came out, I started playing chess online, and it was something I hadn't done since I was a kid, and I said, "Okay, I'll lean into that." So I bought some books. I started going to a chess club. I loved it, and it was at that moment I realized how much I was burning myself out. Being a solo founder, even though I have a great team around me, I mean, I have so many great people and resources and advisors that help me every day and contractors and everything else. I have amazing people that I work with. Being a solo founder it's just completely taxing. You don't have, you know, you don't have somebody else to share the load. The struggle is real. I mean, it's on your shoulders. My wife is very understanding and she's very supportive and she wanted me to go for my dream. So, we've been dealing on one income for 3 years now, so it's stressful. And when I started digging into chess and leaning more into this hobby, I realized how burnt out I was and
Mm.
how much that was affecting me and how much it was actually negatively impacting my work and my relationships with people.
Yeah,
And it's an eye-opening experience. And, it's one of those things that leaders always need to be cognizant of where their head's at. And it doesn't matter how you tackle that. You can go to therapist, you can do meditation, you can do yoga, whatever you want to do, but make sure you're always checking in with yourself. Make sure you're always asking yourself, how am I today? Am I overburdened? Do I need a rest day?
yeah,
Because founders, you have this thing drilled into your head that there is no rest day. You're essentially working 80 hours a week. You do what you got to do to get everything off the ground. And I never wanted to do that. I didn't, you know, my family is very important to me. It's the most important thing to me. And I wanted to make sure that they had all of me too. And, and running myself into the ground and burning myself out because I was dealing with grief by throwing myself into work that negatively impacted everything around me, and I think leaders fall into that trap a lot.
I totally agree. I think for me, you're spot on there, mate. I think that mental health day is every day. Um, it doesn't need a dedicated day to make people aware. I think it should be something that we just recognize every single day. For me, I find journaling really, really powerful. Meditation is great, but just writing how I'm feeling, how yesterday was, what today looks like,
Yeah,
for me, it's just some sort of mental log that you go, yeah, okay. I feel overwhelmed potentially, but like you, I love and care about my family deeply. The most important thing to me, and that's my priority in life. I might stress that I haven't replied to an email or a message, but that person can wait. Nothing's going to be that important more than your family. So I appreciate you sharing that, mate. That's a great insight, and sorry for all the loss you had last year.
I appreciate
Um,
that. I want to mention one other thing because I think this is important, and it's very important for leaders. Stop being so self-involved and make sure you're paying attention to the people around you too, to make sure they're not struggling with something, and give them a forum to be open and vulnerable about it. I think as a society at large throughout the world, we need to normalize talking about mental health. We shouldn't have this stigma that if you're depressed, that you're crazy. I mean, it's terrible. And we have this, suicide at earlier and earlier ages. I mean, we just need to be more cognizant outside of our own headspace and be cognizant of the people around us and make sure that they're okay. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes that takes a leader to be vulnerable and show their vulnerabilities first so that other people realize that it's a safe space. And I think that's a really, really powerful message. Thank you, mate. Just as we start to wrap up this conversation, if you've got one piece of advice for leaders when it comes to transformation, what would it be?
get rid of your savior complex and rely on your people. You hired them for a reason. Let them do their job.
I love that. I love that. Joe, I've got 3 rapid fire questions for you. So if you're ready,
Okay,
let's go.
let's do it.
One habit that you won't compromise on.
Ooh, drinking coffee.
Okay. One mistake that's taught you the most.
Man, that's a tough one. That's not so rapid fire, man. That's
It's
like
not. It gets you thinking, doesn't it?
one mistake that I've learned from the most. It was overcoming this incessant need to always be right. That
Okay.
it's not necessarily a specific mistake, but I had this chip on my shoulder where I always wanted to be right and had to be right.
Yeah.
And in order to grow as a person and as a worker, I had to figure out a way to get that out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, fair play. And one thing leaders don't talk about enough.
Other people are doing, mentally. We just talked
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah.
Leaders don't check in with the personal side of their employees. Yes, there's certain personal things you don't want to dig into, and work is work. But at the same time, you know, leaders want to go out there and say, we're all a family. Well, that's BS, because if times get tough, you're going to cut about 30% of these people that are your family. Um, they just don't check in and make sure that they're not overwhelming, that their staff isn't overwhelmed, that they're understanding and that they're, at their peak, not, kind of beaten down by everything that's going on in the facility.
Yeah. Great answer. Joe, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much. I would say go and get some sleep, but you've probably got a few more hours of work left, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah. I'll get some sleep later. I usually take a nap around 9 a.m. after I
Good
get
man.
back taking my son to school.
Good man. Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, mate.
Thanks, Stubby.
That's it for this episode of Stubby Talks Transformation. Real leaders, real change. Follow the show for the next conversation, and we'll see you next time.